The crack came before the breath. Wood met bone, a noise bright as lightning, and my lungs refused to open. The chair slipped from my sister's hands and rattled on the tile, a lazy clatter that mocked the pain blooming under my left ribs. My name is Brooke Chandler, and on my mother's birthday, at her own table, I learned how silence fractures long before bone does. Vanessa Morton stood over me, fingers still curled like the chair was there, eyes shining with that cold triumph she saved for me. "That's what you get for talking back," she said, as if manners were the crime. My mother froze with the cake knife hovering above frosting roses. My father didn't rise. He pressed his napkin flat like a man smoothing a problem into the tablecloth. I turned onto my side because the room tilted, and the floor felt steadier than the faces looking down. Each breath was a blade. The world narrowed to the burn beneath my skin, the taste of metal at the back of my throat, the patterned glare of the chandelier scattering across the plate I'd dropped. "Get up, Brooke," my father said, "the way you speak to a stubborn child who won't put on her shoes." "You're fine." I wasn't fine. My body knew it before I did something inside had given way. The sound of it kept replaying, that bright crack that didn't belong in a dining room dressed for celebration. I reached for the edge of a chair that hadn't been used as a weapon and pulled myself upright. Nobody moved to help. I stared at the framed family photo on the wall, Vanessa centered. Me turned a fraction toward the edge and understood how a picture can tell the truth by accident. I stopped saying nothing. I grew up in a house where the walls remembered everything, even if the people inside pretended not to. Ours was a 2-story colonial on the edge of a Pennsylvania suburb. White shutters, trimmed hedges, the kind of place neighbors described as picture perfect. From the outside, maybe it was. Inside, though, the picture always bent toward Vanessa. She was the sun in our orbit. When she walked into a room, conversation bent with her. My mother's laugh came easier. My father's patience stretched longer. For me, they had nods, distracted glances, quick reminders to be helpful. Vanessa could leave dishes in the sink, and Mom would call it busy with school. If I forgot to rinse one glass, I was careless, ungrateful. Those small imbalances stacked until they became the furniture of my childhood. I remember being 8 and bringing home a ribbon from a spelling bee. I held it out at the dinner table, proud of the neat blue strip with my name written in careful script. Mom glanced at it, said, "That's nice," then turned to watch Vanessa try to balance a spoon on her nose. The ribbon slipped from my hand onto the floor, forgotten before dessert. Even then I knew how to swallow the sting, because in our house, swallowing was survival. The first time Vanessa shoved me, I was 12. She wanted my sweater, and when I said no, she pressed me hard against the banister until my shoulder ached. My parents called it sibling rivalry. They told me to stop making such a fuss. Vanessa strutted away wearing the sweater, and I learned something new. Pain meant nothing if it came from her hands. By high school, the pattern had written itself into my skin. If she slammed my door, if she hissed words sharp enough to cut, if I hid bruises under long sleeves, none of it reached them. They were fluent in looking past me. The more they excused her, the smaller I became, shrinking into library stacks, schoolwork, anywhere she wasn't. But there were moments, quiet ones, when I wondered if I was invisible, even to myself. I kept a journal hidden under my mattress, filling it with words I never spoke out loud. On its pages, I was more than the afterthought they raised. On its pages, I existed, and even then, I think I knew the silence couldn't last forever. The little wounds never vanished. They just settled under my skin. A dull ache that came alive whenever Vanessa decided to remind me of my place. She had a way of finding the tender spots, both literal and invisible. A slammed door that rattled the pictures on my wall. A whispered insult slipped into my ear while no one was listening. A bruise on my hip from when she shoved me against the counter because she wanted the last slice of pizza. Each time, I thought maybe this would be the moment my parents noticed, but they never did. Mom would tilt her head, sigh, and say, She's just strong-willed, Brooke. Don't take it so personally. Dad would tell me to toughen up, that life wasn't fair, and then disappear into the garage with his toolbox. Their words taught me the art of disappearing, of folding my pain small enough to hide under the rug they walked across daily. By the time I was 14, Vanessa had friends who orbited her the way our family did. She was loud, magnetic, the kind of girl others followed out of habit. I became a ghost in my own house. I found excuses to stay late at the library or walk laps around the block until the porch lights flicked on, dreading the moment I'd have to step back inside. Rachel was the only person who saw through it. She lived 2 houses down and had been my friend since kindergarten. One afternoon, when I came over to work on a science project, she noticed the bruises scattered along my arm. I tried to laugh it off, blaming clumsiness, but she didn't smile. She pressed an ice pack into my hand and said softly, "You don't deserve that." I wanted to believe her. But in my world, belief didn't change the rules. The rules were simple. Vanessa wanted. I yielded. Vanessa accused. I was guilty. Vanessa hurt me, and I was expected to heal quietly. I told myself it was temporary, that once I left for college, the pattern would fade. But the truth about small wounds is that they never disappear when no one admits they're there. They fester, waiting for the day they finally break open. Leaving home for college felt like stepping out of a shadow I didn't realize was so heavy. The first night in my dorm, I lay awake in a narrow bed with thin sheets, but the air felt lighter than it ever had in that house. I could breathe without checking if Vanessa was in the next room. For the first time, my silence didn't feel like survival. It felt like choice. I worked hard. Classes, part-time jobs at the campus library, tutoring sessions that paid just enough to cover books and groceries. The bus rides back to my off-campus apartment were long, but I didn't mind. Each paycheck, each receipt with my name on it, became proof that I was building something of my own. After graduation, I landed a steady job in administration at a community college nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I budgeted carefully, clipped coupons, skipped vacations, and after years of saving, I signed papers on a small 2-bedroom condo in a quiet suburb. The realtor handed me the keys, and I sat in the empty living room on the bare carpet, listening to the echo of my own breathing. That sound felt like freedom. When I told my parents, they offered polite congratulations. When Vanessa found out, she called the next day, her voice syrupy sweet. "You've got space. Brooke, I need somewhere to stay just for a while, until I figure things out." She made it sound less like a question and more like an announcement. I told her no, not harshly, just firmly. The 2nd bedroom was meant to be a workspace and guest room, and I wasn't ready to surrender it. Her voice went cold before she hung up. 2 days later, my father called, suggesting I let her stay for the good of the family. I repeated my answer, and his tone shifted from persuasion to disappointment, as if I'd broken some unspoken code. I thought standing my ground would end it. Instead, it lit a fuse I didn't see burning until much later. My mother's birthday fell on a gray Saturday in late March. I almost skipped the dinner, but guilt pushed me into the car. The drive back to the house where I'd grown up felt like walking into a memory I had worked hard to outgrow. Still, I told myself it was just a meal, just a few hours. I could endure it. When I stepped through the front door, the familiar smell of roast chicken and lemon polish hit me. Vanessa was already at the table, sitting at the head as if it belonged to her, her laugh filling the room. Mom fluttered around with dishes, and Dad poured wine like nothing in the world could be wrong. I took my seat near the end, determined to keep my voice steady, my presence small. The first courses passed with forced politeness, but tension hummed underneath, waiting for the spark. It came over dessert, when Vanessa set her fork down and turned the conversation toward me. "Brooke's got that fancy condo now," she said, her smile sharp. "All that space for just one person. Imagine what a real family could do with it." The table went quiet, except for the clink of my mother's fork against porcelain. I swallowed, then answered, I worked hard for my home. Who lives there is my choice. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look I'd known since childhood, the flat, hard glare that meant she wouldn't back down. She leaned forward, her voice low but carrying. You care more about your walls than your sister. That's pathetic. I felt the weight of my parents' eyes, waiting for me to fold, to yield the way I always had. Instead, I steadied my breath and said, I'm not responsible for fixing your life. Vanessa, I won't be bullied into it. Her chair scraped back. For a moment I thought she'd storm out, and I braced for the door to slam. But instead, she stood tall, her hands gripping the wooden chair beneath her. The air thickened. My parents stayed frozen, their silence louder than any protest. And then I saw her jaw tighten, her fingers whiten on the wood. The fuse was nearly gone. The sound of the chair dragging across the floor was a warning I didn't understand until it was too late. Vanessa lifted it with both hands, her shoulders tense, eyes narrowed to slits. For 1 second, the room slowed, stretched thin, and I thought I could talk her down. But before I could draw in a full breath, she swung. The impact stole the air from my lungs. A sharp crack echoed inside my chest, louder than the clatter of glassware spilling across the table. Pain flooded everything, bright and blinding, a fire running through my ribs. My knees gave out, and I collapsed onto the carpet, arms curling around myself like that could hold me together. That's what you get for talking back, Vanessa hissed, her voice cold and certain. I looked to my parents. My father sat stiff in his chair, arms crossed, jaw clenched, not at her, but at me. My mother's eyes darted between us, calculating whether this scene was worth acknowledging. Call an ambulance, I managed to rasp. You'll be fine, Dad muttered. Dismissive, like I'd spilled milk. Another wave of pain crashed through me, cutting off my words. I couldn't breathe deeply without knives stabbing inside. Finally, Mom stood, muttering that maybe I should be checked at urgent care. Dad helped me up with the indifference you'd offer a stranger. Vanessa sat back down, fork in hand, returning to her slice of cake as if nothing had happened. The drive to the clinic blurred in and out of consciousness. Every bump in the road felt like a hammer against my chest. The nurse's eyes widened at the spreading bruises, and x-rays confirmed what my body already knew: 2 ribs fractured. The doctor spoke firmly about the risk of punctured lungs, about weeks of healing. He asked how it happened. I told him the truth. My parents stayed silent. On the way home, Dad dropped me at the curb with a curt, "Take care of yourself." Vanessa never looked up from her phone as I limped past. That night, in my apartment, the pain throbbed with every breath, but something else had shifted too. I realized silence was no longer survival, it was surrender. The bruises darkened overnight, spreading like storm clouds across my ribs. Each breath was shallow, ragged, and each movement reminded me of the chair's edge biting into my side. I stood in front of the mirror and lifted my shirt just enough to see the map of purple and black, a twisted artwork my sister had left behind. For years I had hidden marks like these, but this time I lifted my phone and started taking pictures. Rachel came by the next morning with groceries, and that look she always had when she knew I was lying. When she saw the bruising, her jaw tightened. "Brooke, this isn't just family drama. This is assault," I wanted to argue, to say maybe I had provoked it. Maybe I was overreacting. But the words died in my throat. She guided me to the couch, set the groceries aside, and said, "You need to keep every piece of evidence. Photos, medical records, everything." Her certainty anchored me. I pulled out the envelope from urgent care where the x-rays had been tucked. The radiologist's marks circling the fractures like undeniable proof. Holding those images in my hands, I felt something strange, fear. Yes, but also validation. For once, the damage wasn't invisible. Rachel helped me contact an attorney, a soft-spoken man named Daniel Carter, who specialized in domestic assault cases. Sitting in his office, I told him everything: the birthday dinner, the chair, the years that led up to it. He listened without interrupting, then examined the X-rays. His voice was calm but firm. "This is aggravated assault. It's serious. Brooke, you have a strong case." The words rattled me. I'd spent so long believing my pain was minor, dismissible. Hearing it named for what it was sent a shiver through me. Daniel asked if I was ready for the fallout. Families rarely take kindly to one member breaking the silence. I thought about Dad's cold eyes, Mom's hesitation, Vanessa's smirk. Then I nodded. That night, alone, I placed the photos, the medical files, and the X-rays into a folder. I slid it into a drawer in my desk, my hand trembling but steady enough. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving the damage. I was preparing to fight back. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and coffee, a mix of nerves and routine. My shoes clicked against the polished floor as I walked beside Daniel, the folder of evidence tucked under his arm like a shield. Rachel squeezed my hand before we entered the courtroom, whispering, "You've got this." Her confidence steadied me, more than the painkillers dulling the last aches in my ribs. When Vanessa walked in, she wore a smug smile, flanked by our parents. Mom avoided my eyes. Dad stared at me like I was the problem that had brought them here. A flicker of old fear rose in my chest, but Daniel leaned close and murmured, "They're not in control here. You are." The judge entered, stern eyes sweeping the room. The proceedings began. Daniel started with the X-rays, the images projected on a screen for everyone to see. The clean fractures glowed white against the dark film. Undeniable. For the first time, I watched Vanessa's confidence falter. When I testified, my voice trembled at first, but then steadied as I told the truth. I described the birthday dinner, her words, the swing of the chair, the crack that still echoed in my memory. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The images behind me spoke louder than any flourish could. Her lawyer tried to twist it, suggesting maybe I'd fallen, maybe I exaggerated. I held firm. "She broke my ribs with a chair," I repeated, "and I have the X-rays to prove it." Each time he pushed, Daniel objected, and the judge sustained, piece by piece. Their defense crumbled. When the hearing closed, the judge announced she would issue her decision the following week. Relief and exhaustion washed over me in equal measure. Walking out, Rachel hugged me tightly, and Daniel told me I had done exactly what was needed. For years, my words had been dismissed, minimized, buried. Now they were written into the record, paired with proof no one could erase. And as we stepped into the daylight outside the courthouse, I felt lighter, like the silence that once smothered me had finally cracked open. The day of the verdict, the courtroom felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves held the weight of everything unsaid in my family. The judge reviewed the evidence with a steady voice, then looked directly at Vanessa. "The court finds that the evidence proves beyond a reasonable doubt that you intentionally struck your sister, causing serious bodily harm." The words cut through me like air after a long dive. Vanessa's face drained of color. My father muttered under his breath. My mother stared at the floor. The sentence wasn't prison, but it was official community service, fines, and a restraining order that barred her from coming near me for 3 years. It was justice carved into the record, something they could no longer deny. Outside the courthouse, a reporter asked if I wanted to comment. I simply said, "Sometimes you have to stand up, even if it means standing alone," then walked away. The silence that followed from my parents was absolute. No calls, no apologies, but I no longer needed them. I filled the quiet with people who had proven worthy of it: Rachel, neighbors, colleagues who offered kindness where family had not. In time, the bruises faded, the ribs healed, but the lesson stayed sharp. My sister had broken more than bone. She had broken the last chain tying me to silence. Now, when I breathe deeply, without pain, I know it's not just my ribs that healed, It's me.